Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Advancement Center, and welcome once again to the reading of the book, The Magic of Life by Robert Young. And today I start with chapter 27. Bill's pace on the way home was much the same as Suzanne's. His excitement also grew, as did his appreciation of his surroundings. He knew somehow that Suzanne had a special message for him, just like he had lots to tell her. He knew that the days to come would be filled with the results of this day. The sun was quite low in the sky as Bill made his way through the last patch of trees, from where he knew he could look down and see the little cottage where he and Suzanne had decided to live together. The cottage had belonged to Suzanne and Joe, but it was so familiar to Bill now. As he reached the point where he could see the house in the distance, he saw the small figures of Suzanne and the children approaching the house and knew that he had timed it perfectly. He was not quite within earshot, but he knew that if he yelled, they would hear him. So he yelled and yahooed at the top of his voice, and he saw Suzanne stop and turn. She was almost too far away to see her face, but he knew that she had turned, and he saw her wave. She had both arms in the air, waving backwards and forwards and jumping up and down with excitement. Bill knew that it would be another 5 minutes before he got home by the time he zigzagged down the hill, but his heart was pumping and the time disappeared so quickly. When he finally reached the outskirts of the little property, he could not help wondering whether Suzanne knew that he was there. As that thought passed through his mind, the door flung open, and there was Suzanne standing alone, still dressed in her best clothes, waiting with her arms open to catch Bill in full flight as he started to run towards the house. It was an unbelievable feeling for Bill to hold Suzanne, and Suzanne could not believe the sensations that went through her body. Neither of them wanted to move as they held one another, and the excitement rushed between them. Finally, Bill pulled back and said, "What a marvelous day. I've got so much to tell you, and I'm sure you also had a marvelous day." They walked inside the little cottage, hand in hand, and as they walked through the door, Bill asked, "How are the children?" "They're asleep. They had such a big day, and they were so well behaved, but they finally fallen asleep. I doubt if they'll wake again tonight. I doubt we'll see any of them before morning," answered Suzanne. A sparkle came into Bill's eyes, and Suzanne started to giggle. They both sat down at the table and started to relate all the special events of the day. It was almost 9 o'clock in the evening by the time they had finished sharing their news of the day. Neither of them could believe that they had not yet eaten. It then became an enjoyable task to prepare a meal and get settled so they could sit and get comfortable and read to one another. Jamie had taught Bill that it was a great thing to read and to listen. So he would read, Suzanne would listen, and then she would read the same thing in her very special way so that Bill knew exactly the standard that he was to meet. Night had come quickly, and Bill knew that there was a change in the air, and halfway through the preparation of their meal, he turned to Suzanne and said, "I won't be at sea tomorrow. I think we're in for a big one tonight." "How do you know that?" asked Suzanne. "Feel it." "Can you feel the change?" he asked. Suzanne stood for a while and said, "No, I can't, but I can feel the change in you." "That's it. That's the change I'm talking about," he said. "So how come the change is in you and not in the air?" she asked. "Well, it's something that I've always had," explained Bill. "When there's going to be a storm, things change in my body, and other people can tell what's happening to me just as I can feel it in myself. So if you want to know what's happening with the weather, just take notice of what happens to me." "So are we going to get rain then?" Suzanne asked through her laughter. "A lot more than rain," answered Bill. "We're going to get a major storm. So before we do, I better head off to my little shack and make sure it's secure." But it's in the middle of the night, Bill, protested Suzanne. If I don't do it, we'll have nothing left, replied Bill. Well, how long will you be? She asked. It will take me a good half an hour plus 5 or 10 minutes each way at the most. So less than an hour and I'll be back, said Bill reassuringly. Suzanne kissed Bill and quickly reached for an all-weather coat that she had kept behind the door and handed it to Bill. Here, take this, Bill. You might need it, she said lovingly. He smiled and slipped on the coat before disappearing out the door. Suzanne looked at the sky and had no idea that there was any possibility of a change in the weather, but she trusted Bill and quickly went around the house gathering all the things that might blow around. She protected her plants and moved them to a sheltered spot. She made sure all of the shutters were down and then closed the little shed door out the back to make sure all of the chickens were safe. Then, as she walked back into the house, she remembered that the last time the chickens went quiet, there was a storm brewing, and sure enough, there was not a sound from the chickens now. Suzanne smiled and went back into the house to wait for Bill. It seemed like no time at all when a sudden burst of wind hit the house and made that familiar sound of rattling timbers and roof trusses, and Suzanne knew that it was more than a big blow. It had hit so hard and fast, she could barely believe it. There had been no wind, and then suddenly there was a monstrous wind, and she realized that Bill had not yet returned. Suzanne became quite concerned, and before she realized it, she had created pictures in her mind of what had happened to Bill. She started to shake and looked to the heavens and pleaded, "Please, God, make everything safe for Bill." Within seconds, a voice came back to her. It said, "Bill is on his way, and he is fine. He is used to the winds, and he is used to this type of weather. He shall be here shortly." "Is that you, Simeon?" Suzanne asked, but there was no answer. "Please, Simeon, tell me this. Is that you?" For a moment, there was still no reply. Suzanne could feel the response, and she could feel the hair start to rise up on her arms, and then the gentle voice of Simeon said, "Yes, I'm here, and I'm also with Bill. There's no need to worry." Suzanne quickly spoke to that. Simeon would not leave. "Simeon, please tell me, the reading I had today, is it true?" Simeon answered, "Yes, it's true, but remember, that's not all of what's to come." "Could you tell me more?" Suzanne asked. Simeon answered, "It will be fed to you in small batches in such a way that you can handle the information. But remember, what you received today is not all that's going to happen. Don't plan your life on that one event. Remember, there's much more." All of a sudden, Suzanne felt a beautiful wave of love come over her body, and she knew not to ask any more questions and to simply say thank you. That special energy stayed with her for the whole 10 minutes that she had waited for Bill to return. Bill's return was a mad rush of wind through the front door as he flicked the door open and jumped quickly inside. He slammed the door again and stood there with water dripping off him everywhere. Suzanne was not at all worried about the weather. She walked straight up to him and threw her arms around him. The water from his coat was dripping all over her, but she did not care. "Oh, Bill, I'm so glad you're here," she said, relieved that he was back. "And so am I. It's a bit rough out there," said Bill as he shook the water off himself. Suzanne stepped back and said, "I'm trying to be really nice to you, and you're all practical about all of this." "Yeah, sorry about that. I'm just a little bit wet under the ears, I suppose," Bill said as he chuckled to himself. Suzanne laughed too and helped Bill take off his coat. She picked up a towel from the neat pile that she had on the sofa and helped him wipe his face. She wiped him down and then bent down and helped him take off his shoes. Bill marveled at her assistance and at the love and how easy it was to be with Suzanne. The late hour of the night meant nothing to Bill because he was with his special love and nothing else mattered. Chapter 28. The sudden crash woke Willem with a start, as it had sounded like glass shattering everywhere. He quickly switched on the light and looked around, but could not see anything. He could feel the house moving with the gusts of wind, and he knew immediately that they had been hit with a monster storm. He had been in this house before and knew it was solid, so he knew the movement was totally abnormal. He jumped up swiftly and put on his coat and then rushed downstairs, only to see the small window in the hallway had broken. The wind had pushed over a rather large standard lamp, and there was water pouring in through the broken window. Mary arrived a couple seconds after Willem, and she was quite panicky. Willem had to hold her to reassure her and said, "Stay where you are. I'll go and have a closer look." Mary had the sense to grab a blanket, and she handed it to Willem. "Here, take this with you and cover everything before you go over closer," she said. Willem threw it over the broken glass and walked over to have a look at what happened. He noticed that across the opening to the window was the branch of a large tree. He could not see much because it was very dark outside, but he knew that a tree must have fallen against the house. He had no idea what other damage had been done. His first priority was to stop the water pouring in and make sure there was no way further damage could occur inside the house. It was pitch black outside, and the light in the hallway lit the area sufficiently, but it was still difficult to find any place to stop such a wind coming through. There was nowhere to secure anything, and he had no tools or timber, so he was a little bit lost as to what to do. Everything he held up blew away, and they could not see any way of protecting the house except by going outside. Mary knew there was some wood in the shed, but where the window was located was rather difficult to get to. With that wind blowing, she did not like her father going outside, but she knew there was no other alternative. Willem found the old coat that he used to wear many years ago hanging in the garage, as well as his old boots and hat. He laced himself up tightly with an old piece of rope and ventured out into the storm. He knew that he had to go to the shed, and he knew that it would be difficult to hold those doors. He took several pieces of rope to make sure that he could lash things tightly. Willem gradually let the doors open, and out he went into the storm. It was almost impossible to stand up, and he thought that if the wind had been blowing in only one direction, he could have leaned against it, but it was lashing around all over the place, coming from directions that he could not determine, and it was throwing him about as he walked. As he crouched low, he managed to get close to the shed and almost fell over as the effect of the wind changed and it blew around the side of the shed. He was about to open the door when a message came to him immediately. "Do not open the door under any circumstances," it said. He immediately recognized the source of the message, and he knew to trust that message no matter what. Willem stopped and wondered what to do next. The answer soon came. "Go back inside the house and move some furniture, but don't venture out into the storm any further." Willem could not see a way to solve his problem inside the house without going outside and around the other side of the house to at least see what had happened. He started to partially ignore the advice that had been given to him. He did not open the shed door, but he started to venture around to the other side of the house, and as he did, another crack of lightning hit, and it seemed like the wind multiplied to at least double its strength in an instant. Willem was thrown backwards and landed on his back on the concrete. As he landed, another tree came crashing down right where Willem had previously been standing. It was not a very big tree, but it was big enough to do a lot of damage if he had stayed there. He realized that the message he had received was a very serious one. He quickly clambered to his feet and felt the back of his head. It felt different and it felt wet, and he knew that he must have done some damage. But his battling with the wind and the rain completely took his focus as he scrambled back along the path and into the house. He found it was so difficult to get the door open, and he thought to himself, Where have all the big handles gone that we used to have for these sorts of winds? They've got these newfangled knobs now, and you can't hold on to them. Willem bashed on the door, and with the assistance of Mary on the other side, they managed to open it, and he was able to rush inside and close the door behind him. "What happened, Dad? You're bleeding," asked Mary, who panicked when she saw the state he was in. Willem realized what the different feeling was at the back of his head, and he answered, "Don't worry about it right now. We've got to move some furniture and get this window sealed up." "What furniture do we have to block off this window?" Mary thought for a second, but she could only think of the kitchen sideboard, but it was full of crockery, and she did not want to take all of that out. She had nowhere to put it, and then she realized if she did take it out, it would be too light and would not effectively hold the wind. Willem thought for a moment as he walked into the library. "I've got it. We can unload the bookshelves," he said. "We can carry the bookshelves easily, and then we can slide the desk out and push it up close to the window." Mary agreed, and they set about unloading the library, and within minutes they had the bookshelves ready to move. They had no idea of the amount of water that had actually made its way into the house while they had been preparing to fix the problem. When they came out of the library, the hallway was afloat, and they sloshed up and down as they carried the bookshelf and placed it where it could cover the window. They realized immediately that they had to do more than that because the rain was pouring in on that side. Mary found blankets and pillows and packed them behind the new barricade made up of the bookshelf. They pulled the heavy desk out into the hallway and then pushed up against the bookshelf. The storm inside the house stopped almost immediately, but they could feel the house moving and wondered what was going to happen next. Mary was concerned and said to Willem, "If I open any doors, this water is going to go straight into the house." "It's not a problem. We can open the bathroom. It's slightly downstairs, but it's only one step for us to push the water down, and it'll go out through the drain," said Willem. Mary and Willem got to work persuading all that water to move to where they wanted it to go, down the drain in the bathroom. As they thought they had finished the job, there was another crash, and the flimsy bathroom window smashed open again. It had done that once before, but they did not think this type of wind would ever come back again. This time Willem knew what to do. He cleared everything out and locked the door because he knew it was sealed. They did have another toilet, but the damage that had been done already was significant. Mary and Willem were tired and were a little bit frightened as they sat on the step outside the bathroom and held one another in relief. It was a special moment where they had come back together as a family, and all of their differences and all of their pursuits in life had gone out the window. There was nothing that meant more to them than that moment, and there was nothing that was more important than one another. Willem had so much revealed to him in the last 24 hours, and he contemplated all of the events that had come to a peak as a result of accepting Bill's invitation to meet Henry Olsen. He reflected on how his meeting with Mary had cleared years of discomfort in a single moment, and how the change in Henry Olsen had given Henry a vision of the future that he had never seen before. Willem marveled at the special moment where Mary and Willem became one, just as they always had been before all of the upsets. Willem knew that beyond doubt there was another force at play. There was assistance from another realm, and there were many plans that had played out that had never been revealed to Willem. So his appreciation and his connection with Simeon filled his heart and added very much to the moment. Mary could not believe her own feelings, and she actually had her father back again. Someone who she thought had disappeared and gone into another world, and someone she had kept clear of wherever possible, and he had changed and come back a better man. Her thoughts turned to her love, her Henry, who turned out to be an unbelievable person, a person of great compassion and love that actually fitted Mary's vision, and she had not done anything to cause it. Once again, like her father, she knew the intervention that had taken place was more than anything she could have imagined. Neither Willem nor Mary could understand the intensity of the storm that was raging outside. They had never felt the house move like this, and it was at that moment they wondered how everybody else on the island was surviving. Willem knew that the people who lived on the island itself would not have a problem because they knew how to build houses. They knew exactly what could happen with the weather, as they were very open to the winds that often stripped the land of trees and grass. Their houses were built to handle the worst of weather conditions. It had taken many years for the inhabitants of the island to determine how they should live. Those who lived in Norwich had their standards based on many other things. They were based on experience from countries and based on experiences that were taught to them. But they had never actually experienced the winds that had shaped the island of the Isles. Mary was not so familiar, and even though she had lived on the island for many years, she was not familiar with anything like the winds that they were currently experiencing. She turned to her father and asked, "Dad, what's happening?" "We haven't quite got to a cyclone level at this point, but don't be surprised if it turns into one," answered Willem. "You mean it's going to get worse?" asked Mary. "I'm afraid so," said Willem. "Everything that's happened to us here tonight will be happening to many other people. Luckily, though, all of the major buildings should be okay." "What about Henry? How's Henry? I better ring him," said Mary, who was quite concerned. "Don't bother, Mary. He'll be busy," said Willem. "You're better off waiting until he rings you. That is, if it's possible, and if the lines aren't down." Even though most of the lines were underground, there were sections that depended on overhead lines, particularly back to the power station. Willem was thankful that the power was still available. He suddenly thought about his training in England, where the first thing you were taught is to look for candles. He turned to Mary and asked, "Do you have any candles?" "I have lots of candles. I burn them all the time, Dad," said Mary. "Well, you'd better get them out because we might need them. Now make sure that all of your food is stacked in areas where we can get at it if anything should happen to the house. We look like we're in for a big one, so let's get prepared," said Willem. Mary shivered for a moment, but then that special essence within her started to grow, and she felt warm and comfortable. She wondered why, and then suddenly she knew. She realized the challenge that may stand before her, and she knew that she was ready for the task. It was something she had always known she had, and it was a quality that Willem admired. Mary knew exactly what to do about everything, and she got up from the step, took no notice of her father, and headed off to prepare everything they would need for an emergency. She had never done this before, but somehow she knew exactly what to do. Willem looked on in surprise as Mary set about preparing breakfast and putting it to one side. She started preparing meals that could be taken with them, and she found several backpacks and filled them with emergency supplies. She then put candles in every room of the house and made sure there were plenty of blankets available. Mary soon found all of the things that had been stored away that might now help, and they were brought out and placed on the dining room table in the lounge room. She then cleared a space under the stairs, which was the safest place in the house. She knew that if anything should happen to the house, they could move in under the stairs and be safe. Before the hour was out, Mary and Willem felt they were extremely well organized and safe, and then sat down in the big lounge chairs to listen to the storm. They turned out all of the lights except for the one main light so they could watch the lightning. In the semi-dark, they both felt their own true essence, and there was no outside influence apart from nature. All of the problems of the world had disappeared except for the potential for a problem which sat in front of them. They sat ready, just like an athlete ready for a race. But as the night wore on, they both fell asleep, both comfortable and quite elated in their feelings, and they slept peacefully without disturbance. So I'll stop there. And when I return, we'll start on chapter 29 of The Magic of Life. I wish you a perfect life, perfect health, and a magic future. Thank you.